everyone, it's Miss Katy. I am recording from my library since we can't be at our library to see you guys this week and for a little bit longer. So today I wanted to read you the first chapter in one of my favorite books, The Hobbit by JRR Tolkien. If you've been around me at all in the library, I've probably recommended it to you. So here we are reading the first chapter of it. As a little bit of background, a lot of you know about Lord of the Rings. Frodo takes the ring and he goes on his quest. The Hobbit is actually the prequel to it. So it's all about how his uncle, Bilbo, gets the ring. It's a really fun story about adventure and really just finding your own path. And it's a story I really like. And as you can kind of see from my little shelf here, I definitely like Lord of the Rings and I have for a long time. So I thought it would be fun for me to read it in my home library since I can't be with you guys this week and you guys can't come see us. I thought it would be fun just to kind of get a little peek into what I do at my house. So we are going to start off. I'm using my copy of The Hobbit. If you have a copy at your house, you can follow along with us. If not, it's fine. I'll try to go slow enough so you guys can all hear. And yes, for anybody that's asking, we have one copy of The Hobbit at the library. So whenever we come back to school, you guys are welcome to check it out. All right, so we're going to get started. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. This was a hobbit hole, and that meant comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened up to a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled wood walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The Hobbit was quite fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for miles and round called it, and many little round doors opened up out of it, first on one side and then on the other. No going upstairs for these hobbits. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-handed side, going in, for those were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows, looking out into the garden and the meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. The Hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for some time, and the people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they had never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without bother of asking him. This is the story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you'll see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. Now, what is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become very rare and shy of big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except in the ordinary everyday sort, which helps them disappear quickly and quietly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making noise like an elephant, which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes, because their feet grow natural leathery soles and thick warm brown hair like stuffs on their head, which is curly. They have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have at least twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough about to go on with this. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits, who lived across the water in a small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said, in other families that is, that long ago the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was something not entirely hobbit-like about them. And once in a while, members of the family disappeared. Members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures. After she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins, Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money. That was to be found either under the hill, or over the hill, or across the water. And there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got a bit of odd in his makeup from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance, one morning, long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, which were neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Now, I don't know if you guys can see back here, but I've got a little Gandalf. So he's going to join us on our adventure. And I know that there's at least one other little figurine I have back here that's going to join us, but I don't want to give any spoilers, so let's keep moving on. Gandalf. If you had heard only a quarter of what I had heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for a sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. Had he not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died. In fact, the hobbits had almost forgotten what he had looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own ever since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a long, pointy blue hat and a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf, over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green, but Gandalf asked him from under long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out farther than the brim of his shady hat, "What do you mean? Do you want to wish me a good morning? Or do you mean that the morning is good, whether I want it to be or not? Or do you feel that this morning is good, or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There is no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down by his seat by the door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated over the hill. "Very pretty," Gandalf said, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share an adventure that I am arranging, and it is very difficult to find anyone. I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner, and I can't think of what anybody sees in them. And our Mr. Baggins stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. And then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided he was not quite his sort, and wanted him to go away. But the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the Hobbit, even without saying anything, until Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," Gandalf said. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good until I move off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir. And I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins." "And you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morninged by Belladonna Took's son, as if I were selling buttons at the door." Gandalf, good gracious me. Not the wandering wizard that gave the old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone until ordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected lucks of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks? Not the man that I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. And he also was not very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on, not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves, sailing in ships, or sailings to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to be upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business." "Where else should I be?" asked the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find that you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you ask for." "I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything." "Yes, you have, twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and very profitable, too. Very likely, if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures. No, thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like." "Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye." With that, the Hobbit turned and scuttled into his round green door and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards are wizards after all. "What on earth did I ask him to tea for?" he said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after a fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while, he stepped up and with the spike of his staff scratched an odd sign into the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. And then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down on his engagement tablet like this: Gandalf, Tea Wednesday. Yesterday he had just been too flustered to do anything of the kind. But just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed to put on the kettle and pour out another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two, and then ran to the door. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say, when he saw it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, as if he had been expected. He hung his cloak on the nearest peg and said, "Dwalin, at your service." "Bilbo Baggins at yours," said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions. When the silence had followed, he had become uncomfortable. He added, "I am just to take tea. Pray come and have some with me?" A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. "And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung up his things in your hall, without a word of explanation?" They had not been at the table long, in fact. They had hardly reached third cake when came another, even louder ring to the bell. "Excuse me," said the hobbit, and he went to the door. "So you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say at Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the steps with a white beard and a scarlet hood. He too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, as if he had been invited. "I see that they've begun already," he said, when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it and said, "Balin, at your service." And he put his hand on his breast. "Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived and preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short. And then, he as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it painfully, but he might have to go without cake. "Come on in and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. "A little beer would suit me, if that's all the same to you, my good sir," said Balin with the white beard. "But I don't mind some cake, seed cake, if you have any." "Lots," Bilbo found himself answering to his own surprise, and found himself scuttling off to the cellar to fetch a pint beer mug, and then to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake right in front of them, and when a loud ring came at the bell, and then another. "Gandalf this time, for certain," he thought as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "Kili at your service," one said, "and Fili," the other added, and they both swept their blue hoods off and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin are already here, I see," said Kili. "Let's go join them." "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarves sat around the table and talked about mines and golds and troubles with goblins and depredations of dragons and lots of other things that he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded too much adventurous. And when a ding-along, he ran his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door?" he said, blinking. "Some 4, I should say, by the sound," said Fili. "Besides, we saw them coming along up behind us in the distance." The poor hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would all stay for supper. And then the bell rang louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all. It was 5. Another dwarf had come along when he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names. And very soon 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, a brown hood, a white hood were all hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a mob. Some called for ale, and some called for porter, one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the Hobbit was very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set on the hearth, and the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were starting on a round of buttered scones when there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat-tat on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging on it with a stick. Bilbo rushed to the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of another. More dwarves! 4 more! And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent in the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had carefully put there the morning before. Carefully, carefully, he said. It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Boffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Bifur, Boffer, and Bomber, standing in a row. They hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last one belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bifur, Boffer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty, and said nothing about service. But poor Mr. Baggins, he said he was sorry so many times, and at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. Now here we are, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What is that, tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry jam and apple tart, said Bifur. And mince pie and cheese, said Bofur. And pork pie and salad, said Bomber. And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind, said the dwarves from the door. Put on a few eggs, that's a good fellow, Gandalf called, as the hobbit stumped off to the pantry. And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know about as much inside of my larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right to his house. By the time he had gotten all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and all things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confusicate and be bothered, these dwarves, he said aloud. Why didn't they come and lend a hand? And lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Feely and Keely, and before he could say knife, they had all whisked the trays and a couple of small tables to the parlor to set everything out afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, and the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo had sat on the fireplace nibbling at his biscuit. His appetite was quite taken awry, and trying to look as if it was all perfectly normal, not in the least like an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you'll all want to stay for supper, he said in his politest, unpressing tones. Of course, said Thorin, and after. We shan't get through our business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up. Thereupon 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of things. Off they went, not wanting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage. But the dwarves started to sing. Now, I'm not going to sing this part. But one thing that Tolkien likes to do is he likes to create his own poems and songs. So I'm going to read you the song that he has here. And if any of you guys have seen the movie, this is very similar to the first part of the first Hobbit movie. So, chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor and leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. Dump the crocks in a boiling bowl. Pound them up with a thumping pole. And when you've finished, if any are whole, send them down to the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully, carefully with the plates. And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned up and put away as safe and as quick as lightning. While the Hobbit turned round and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. And then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing a most enormous smoke ring, and wherever he told one to go, it went. Up the chimney, behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them already, and in the dim light, it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he would have been yesterday morning if the smoke rings he had sent up in the wind over in the hill. Now for some music. Bring out the instruments. Keely and Feely rushed for their bags and brought out the fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Belfer went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among their walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with viols as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck the music, began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else and was swept away to the dark lands under the strange moons, far over the water and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from a little window that opened on the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing from the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes, and this like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without music. Now again, there's going to be a song here. Again, if anybody's seen the movie, this is the part of where they all stand in the circle and sing. It's actually a really great song. So if you want to after this, you can Google it. It's called Misty Mountains. So I'll read this, and then after that we're gonna stop for now. I haven't gotten to the end of chapter 1, but we've already gotten pretty far, and there's a lot of words on my page. So I think this might be a good place to stop. So, far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away, ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells. In places deep, where dark things sleep, in hollowed halls behind the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there are many gleaming hoard. They shaped and wrought, and the light they caught, to hide in gems on a hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung. The dragon fire and twisted wire, they meshed in the light of the moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away, ere break of day, to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. They lay long, and many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring in the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flamed, it spread, like trees, like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. Then dragons' ire, more fierce than fire, laid low on their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. All right, and I know I said that I would get through chapter 1 during this sitting. However, I'm to page 15 on mine, and we still have another about 15 to go, and I'm already at a half an hour. So I'll do this as chapter 1, part 1, and then I'll try to continue along. As you can kind of see, I don't know if you guys can see on mine, but the words are just kind of small on here, and it does take a while. If you guys didn't know, Tolkien actually wrote The Hobbit in the 1930s. So as you can tell, some of the language is a little bit different than what we're used to seeing today, and so it takes a little bit longer. But, so there's part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. I really enjoyed reading this. As I said, this is one of my absolute favorite books. Between this and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, you guys know me. So thank you so much for tuning in. I should have the second half of it up at some point. So, overall, Mrs. White and I really miss you guys. So I wish I was able to read this in person with you instead of recording it at my house. But I'm sure we'll all see you guys soon. So take care. Bye.